Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us. We are excited that you are here. My name is Sean Bishop, and I'm going to be our host for this evening. And welcome to the 2021 Webb City Farmers Market Winter Vegetable Production Conference. This is in collaboration with a lot of people. And again, we genuinely appreciate you stopping by and visiting with us. Okay, so for tonight, we have an agenda that we're going to try very hard to follow to stay on time. First, a welcome from our own Rachel Lynch from Webb City. Rachel, if you can reach out and unmute yourself, that would be great. And then we've already done the committee members. We're going to do an introduction to season extension. We're going to give you, again, these principle-based approaches to make sure that you are going to be successful if you do decide to winter harvest or to have edible product for sale throughout the year. We're then going to get a call in from our wonderful NRCS state office talking about a very exciting grant initiative that they have started to help reimburse for part of the cost of a high tunnel on your operation. We then have a video looking at successful IPM strategies from our new state IPM specialist at Lincoln University. And at that point, we're going to take a 5-minute break, let everybody stretch, stand up, go get some more coffee, use the restroom, and then we're going to come back for what is our first virtual farm tour with the Yang family farm. From there, we will open it up. We'll try to give as much time as we can, perhaps the last half hour, for questions and answers for the 3 speakers that we're going to have tonight. Fu Yang with his farm, Dr. Clement Akotson-Mensah, who is our state IPM specialist, and Mr. Brad McCord through NRCS. Rachel, are you with us and able to talk to us?
Yes, I am.
Very good. Would you like to, on behalf of Webb City, welcome everybody?
Oh, yes. We're just so excited to have everyone gathered together online for the 2021 Winter Production Conference. I know I speak for everyone involved when we say thank you so much for your interest in learning to grow in the colder temperatures. Year-round growing is such a useful tool and so important for our communities. We're just really happy to have you. And speaking of community, if you're interested in being a vendor at the Webb City Farmers Market, we are 21 years old and we are always looking to grow and meet new friendly faces. So again, thank you so much for coming tonight and for dedicating the next few Tuesday evenings to join us and learn what these great farmers have to offer. With that, I'll turn it over back to you.
Thank you very much. And again, we are very excited to have you all with us this evening. We've got, as you can see, sort of a very jam-packed schedule, but we wanted to work to give you the best information that we could in the short time that we have together. Okay. So what I wanted to talk about briefly with you as we begin this walk through successful winter production across the Midwest is an introduction to season extension and the useful tools that we have to help us. All right. So we're only going to talk about 2 things this evening. And we're going to talk about having the correct mindset. And we're going to talk about where to place the season extension structure that you're thinking about putting on your farm, because these are by far and in large, over the decade that we've been working with farmers sort of in this vein, this is over and over and over again, the questions that we get. So we really want to make sure to give you the best answers that we can, so that you're going to view the rest of these farm tours that we have for you in a light that makes sense to you. Okay. So this is one of my favorite pictures that I always show when I'm talking about high tunnel production. This is the Lincoln University's high tunnel sitting at the Southwest Research Center, which is an MU campus in Mount Vernon, Missouri. This is after a 78-mile-an-hour sustained wind. And this is the fourth time that Mr. David Middleton and I have rebuilt this high tunnel. There is literally nothing in the way to stop this wind from the steps of the Colorado Rockies until the front of this high tunnel. It has to be the windiest place on the face of the planet. I know everybody thinks that your farm is, but genuinely, this is just, it's unbelievable the amount of wind that we receive here. You guys can see in the picture, there's center blocks that have been blown out. It's ripped our fertigator out of the front, and it actually has cracked two 2x12s right here in the middle. So the first thing that we want to say is that the high tunnel is a tool. It is not a silver bullet. Right. And that's extremely important for us. As we go forward, it is just one more tool in your farmer's toolbox. There's nothing magical about it. It's just one more way that we can have income generating on a year-round basis and have a comfortable workspace when we are harvesting throughout the winter months. Right. These structures can and should be used to generate income. As a matter of fact, what they cost versus what you can make in a decent market is it's relatively low input for what you can get back out of it. And so that's a wonderful thing that we like to sort of highlight. Now, for winter production, we do like to think about using winter crops. And that might be kind of a silly statement at first, but it's important to understand that at this latitude, you're not going to be producing tomatoes in February without supplemental heat and light. Primarily, what we're going to be doing as we take you on these farm tours is we're going to be focusing on essentially salad greens, simpler plants that have lower temperature and light requirements. Right? That's going to give you the most bang for your buck. That's going to be extremely successful for you to be able to harvest throughout the winter time, focusing on these cool season crops. The last thing that I want to point out, and we get a lot of questions about this, is just simply these are supposed to be low cost and low tech. They are passive structures. It never fails that after giving a presentation, we always have somebody that's so excited run up to us and they say something to the effect of, hey, I was thinking about putting in a geothermal heat system for my high tunnel. Right? Why that's a wonderful idea, that's going to cost twice as much as your high tunnel structure does. We're not saying don't do it. What we are saying is that maybe get at least a couple of seasons of cash flow underneath your belt so that you can make better managerial decisions in how to spend your money for your business. So supposed to be low cost, low input, a couple of seasons of production to see really what you can make and what markets are there before you decide to invest in structures with something like a geothermal heat system, again, is the recommendation. So there are 4 key elements when we're talking about successful winter production. And this is coming from a book. I'll show a couple of them to you later that needs to be added into your library, your grower library, but it's a Elliot Coleman's The 4-Season Harvest. And it's a wonderful book. And he points out 3 things as keys to successful year-round production. The first one we've talked about, cold hardy vegetables, is the next one, which is just as important, I think, as succession planting. And that's really what we'll focus on with Doug and with Karen with Oakwoods Farms, because they have an amazing planting schedule and system. So eventually what can happen is you're going to run into a place because of lower light and lower temperature where your plants are going to slow down. And so having done the proper work before that point of slowdown so that you have plants grown and they'll scent in that cold soil with those low light conditions, and they'll grow at a much slower pace, almost like they're sitting in a refrigerator waiting for you to harvest. Being able to do that and plan that out before going into what we call the Persephone period is going to be key to your success with winter production. Protected cultivation, that's again, we're talking about structures to be used. And there's several things that we can talk about. And I've got a couple pictures here at the end of the short slideshow where we'll show other things that you can use structures like high tunnels for. So 4-season structures, you absolutely can get year-round benefit from. They will improve the quality of crop or the consistency that you're going to be able to harvest that crop at. There's a lot of good things about them other than just growing comfortably or harvesting comfortably in the winter time. And lastly, this is something that I added in, the patience, right? This is one heck of a growing curve. There's a lot of knowledge that you're going to come into that it's a lot different, and it feels a lot different than sort of the production that we see on the front side of the calendar year, if you will, with springtime, right? If what happens if your neighbor has sweet corn faster than you do, or a tomato that's ripe faster than yours, that's absolutely good for bragging rights, but eventually you will have product, right? However, in the fall, going into winter production, if you miss those planting dates, you might well have a very large portion of the winter that you do not have anything to sell, waiting for those plants to mature, right? And so there is a learning curve to this. Sort of listen for these buzzwords as we go through these farm tours. We've tried very hard to highlight these for you guys and for you to be able to sort of being able to pick those out. The last one, and this is really, if you hear nothing else before the virtual tour, please listen to this. When I started winter production, or had my first high tunnel, which was made out of PVC and blew down, I could not understand for the life of me how people have these beautiful green, ready to harvest plants in the middle of January or the middle of February. I couldn't understand it, right? How you can do this is your succession planting coming out of the late summer and in the early fall. Excuse me. And what you're doing is you are essentially planting plants to be just about mature for Southwest Missouri by November 20. And the reason why we're focusing on that date is because, again and again, in vegetable research, what we see is that when we drop in a photo period below 10 hours of sunlight or less, the plants do not grow at their traditional rate. They grow at a very reduced rate. And so what we're doing is we're succession planning on this bed being ready by this particular point in December by planting it so early in the fall. So for us, the Persephone period, that period where we have less than 10 hours of sunlight per day, lasts from November 20 until January 20, right? And you can start seeds then, that's fine, but they're going to grow at a greatly reduced rate. So much so that if you're starting seeds now, you're going to be harvesting early spring. Versus when you're in the springtime coming into the summer, you can turn over a bed of greens in 2 weeks because that's how quickly that they grow. The key to successful winter harvest is understanding this Persephone period and planning your plants in such a way that you're going to be bringing enough of them close to maturity before we reach that period known as the Persephone period. Okay? I don't know why nobody said that to me, but that's really what we found to be the key to success. Okay. Second thing we want to focus on in this short PowerPoint presentation. Where do I put my high tunnel? Choosing a site is extremely important, right? But there is no site, especially in the state of Missouri, that is perfect. manage your expectations. Almost any site can be improved by using proper sustainable techniques, cover cropping, adding in compost, working with macro and micro minerals, the nutrients in the soil. The best thing that you can do when deciding if you have two spots in your mind, here or here on my property, take a soil sample. Go to your local university extension office and send that off to the state lab, and they'll tell you, I'm going to grow vegetables. You'll write that on the farm form, and they'll tell you, well, this site is better than that site. And that will help you make that decision. So start with as good as you can, right? But then you can improve from there with various techniques that we'll cover both in this winter production conference and in future trainings. Okay. The second thing that I would say, before you even get a high tunnel, is that you need to know exactly what you're going to do with it. What are you going to be growing? Who are you going to be growing for? Are those markets already there in your area? What do the farmers markets look like in your area? Are they accepting new growers? There's a lot of research that needs to go into this before you make the leap, right? So knowing exactly what you're going to use these structures for, I think, is one of the keys to success. Over and over again, we've taken farm tours, and I'll see, a tractor parked inside of a high tunnel, no plants, right? Just sitting dormant. That's not what these structures are for. They're not for garages, right? They're supposed to be used for the production of edible goods. And if we do so, they can indeed generate us profit on a year-round basis. So having that in mind, I think, can help us make better decisions as we begin to walk into the setup of our farm. Some things that you should keep in mind, right? Number one is location. From personal experience, if you do not have a high tunnel and you're thinking about getting one, your high tunnel should be as close to where you sleep as possible, period. We had a bad storm around Thanksgiving timeframe this year. We're going to talk about that with Fu. He had some interesting stuff happen on his farm. You'll see that in the video for our virtual farm tour. And I had to get outside at 3 a.m. because my two doors on the west end had blown open in a 50-mile-an-hour gust of wind and were banging around, doing damage to one end of my high tunnel. So every time now that it snows, if you're a high tunnel owner, you don't sleep very well, especially if it's very fast, wet, heavy snow, or if it's ice, it's just all over. So those are things to think about. Have your tunnel as close to where you sleep as is possible. The one that I had shown you guys here in this picture in the bottom, that's my high tunnel, one of them. And that is 20 minutes away from my house. That is too far away at 2 a.m. when something goes wrong, right? We've got a neighbor back here that calls and says, hey, your high tunnel doors are blowing open and your high tunnel seems to be moving. That's too far away, right? And it is something worth noting that these are extremely efficient kites when it comes down to it. For the cubic feet that's inside of your high tunnel, there's not a lot of weight for how much area that they cover. They are very good at taking off if they're not properly anchored and secured. And so, think about that as well. The traditional literature says that your high tunnel is to be adjacent to prevailing winds because of passive, sort of the passive nature of venting the tunnel, meaning that the wind will enter into the side of the tunnel and blow out after swirling, blow out the other side or blow out the ends. That depends upon your location. And orientation, where we live at in Missouri, also is relatively optional to how it fits into your landscape. If you are going to be primarily using a tunnel for winter production, I would encourage you to face the tunnel long ways east-west, right? And so we have one end on the west, one end on the east, because that long side will then be pointing south. And when that sun's low on the horizon in the wintertime, it'll get sort of that all-day sun on that one side. Water, something that I hadn't thought about when I first built my tunnel. When we are selling fruits and vegetables, and this is a secret between us, okay? We are selling water. You are selling water wrapped in colorful membranes, right? That's all spinach is. It's all raspberries are. It's all strawberries are, right? It's just water with mineral elements floating. Now it's healthy for you, but inside of your high tunnel, it doesn't rain anymore. And so we're going to need a way to get water into that tunnel to water those crops. I would highly recommend a frost-free hydrant. And there's a couple of reasons, because every once in a while we do still have a cold snap in Missouri. And secondly, if you're going to go ahead and dig a trench for your water, that would be a great time for you to go ahead and lay down electricity. Save yourself the money, save yourself the time, effort, and energy, and bring electricity into the tunnel. And there's multiple reasons why we would do that. You'll sort of see that as we go through the farms, different setups. But I would highly encourage that from the get-go, you would go ahead and put frost-free, and even before perhaps you built the tunnel, bring in a frost-free hydrant into the edge of your existing garden, and then put that tunnel over it and run electricity. Okay. I think we've talked about that enough. Just the last couple of slides and thoughts. This is a 3-season tunnel on Millsap Farms. That's our last virtual tour this month. And what I really wanted to highlight with it is sort of the year-round capabilities and the benefits for structures for season extension, right? The reason why I've shared this with you is because, of course, we have cherry tomatoes here. Everybody can see that. But I want you to know notice this very sharp contrast, right here, right inside. And you have a lot of disease in these first 3 or 4 plants that are cherry tomatoes. And then it gets inside the tunnel and it looks great. Why? Because rain has been able to get to this end of the row. Because rain has bounced on the soil, bounced up on the leaves, and we have disease that are naturally inherent to our heavy clay soils take off. But look how beautiful and lush the cherry tomatoes are that's underneath that cover, right? And so it's not just that you're going to use these structures for one season. There are benefits to them throughout the year. This is another 3-season structure, again on Millsap's farm, and I'm assuming that we're going to see this live in our last tour. And I just think that it's an absolutely beautiful way to sort of think about how we can use these structures. They're low cost. There is relatively easy to construct with a skeleton crew, which is always a wonderful thing, and they can be extremely effective for allowing us to be able to grow things like greens throughout the winter months. Okay, so with that, I wanted to offer you my contact information. My email, bishopn@lincolnu.edu. Now this is for tonight. So if you have any questions for the speakers that we have lined up for you and you didn't catch how to get a hold of them, please feel free to drop me an email and I will get it to the correct person. If it's specifically a question about NRCS or MU or where your local extension offices are, please include the county where you are at, and that'll help us be able to sort of sort through these and get you where you need to be. Okay. With that, we are going to turn it over to Mr. Brad McCord, who is calling in on behalf of NRCS, and he is going to give us a brief overview of an amazing program that they have for reimbursement per square foot for high tunnels on farming operations. Brad, are you there?
I just want to give you a little bit of an update with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We are a USDA agency, primarily providing technical assistance. This is kind of our focus. We're going to just briefly touch on some high tunnel thoughts. I don't want to dwell on this much. I don't want to take much of your time. I just want to be a resource for you for future reference. We have an extensive network of field offices. There are approximately 99 field offices in across the state of Missouri. So there's an office close to you to provide technical assistance. These are the steps for any, not only high tunnel, but grazing system, water development, soil erosion, whatever your resource concern may be. These are kind of the 5 steps that we like to encourage for you to plan, consider applying for funding if you're interested. Make sure that you're eligible for the program, and as an individual, you're eligible. You'll be ranked against other applications, and then move forward and implement that conservation practice that you hope to. Seasonal high tunnels have been around since about 2010. As Sean and others said, certainly the extend your growing season, increased fruit protection, tremendous products grown there. Just gonna skip through quickly. Kind of a unique practice. It was an early initiative, increase the availability of locally grown food. EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, is primarily the vehicle for funding seasonal high tunnels in Missouri and across the nation. It is not limited to organic or transitioning to organic producers. There's been kind of a myth of that over the years. Some general requirements. We require the individuals to use a manufactured kit. There are many good ideas out there, and some individuals probably have the skills and knowledge to make a kit themselves. But we want you to start from square one and have a good result with the manufactured kit. I like to use some minimum grade of the greenhouse plastic. Crops must be grown within the soil profile. The raised beds are not allowed in the beginning of the contract. If you outside the contract, if you want to do that later down the road, you're more than welcome, but certainly need to be grown in the soil profile in the beginning. Need to be installed on existing cultivated cropland. That may not have to be the FSA definition of cropland, but something that has a cropping history. If you want to do a site in your backyard, make sure that's cultivated, at least garden to some degree initially. You don't want to break out concrete to put in a seasonal high tunnel. Must be an edible crop. Early on, when the seasonal high tunnel initiative started, some of these requirements weren't in place, but today must be an edible crop. Electricity, permanent heating, and mechanical ventilation systems are allowed. They were not in the beginning. So I saw a question in chat that those enhancements are certainly allowed now. This is our information from an NRCS in Missouri standpoint. This is my information. I will give you a 30-second overview. I work with producers across the state. I don't work very much at a local level. I work at a statewide level. Many producers call me. They may not have experience with NRCS, or may not have experience. They may have had a bad experience in the past, and may not feel comfortable going into their local office. Maybe language is a barrier. Whatever the case may be, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, Sean, and Lincoln University, as well as MU Extension. Have been great resources to channel folks to me. If you have a question, I'll be able to get you to the local contact and get you the service that you need.
Oh, if you would like to, do we have a couple of questions specifically for Brad?
We do have a couple questions specifically for Brad.
Okay.
Are you still there, Brad?
The first question is, can you restate again about add-ons like water and electricity if they're allowed?
Yes, they are allowed. We certainly encourage you to work with planning professional, incorporate those in your conservation planning process early. As Sean mentioned, you want to do that in the beginning, not as an afterthought, but absolutely those are allowed and encouraged.
Okay, very good. And the other question is about hayfields. Are they allowed as a crop history? Hayfields are considered a crop history.
Hayland generally is considered a crop, yes, and we would encourage, I guess, Sean and other resource professionals can probably give you a better idea for what site prep would be good ahead of time before you start construction, more tillage or more site prep. But yes, haylands are considered would be considered cropland.
Okay, and the questions keep coming. Someone is asking about a more in-depth explanation about what exactly is meant by the term cost share.
Yes, and we can talk hours about this. I'm sure this is Sean's worst nightmare. NRCS provides traditionally 75 to 90% cost share. That means you're going to be dependent on the size of the tunnel you want to build, the specifications, the variety of factors, and Sean can cover more of that later on. But generally, you're going to have to pay the bill up front and then show us the receipts, then we'll reimburse you. Is generally how it works. Is how it works. Missouri has averaged about $1.3 million, $1.5 million for the last 3 to 5 years. That's about an average of 150 high tunnels constructed per year. Generally, we're about $250 to $275 per square foot, with that's about a 70 by 300 or 30 by 70 or so footprint for that tunnel. And reimbursement is considered taxable. Certainly, you would want to look into an accounting professional with your tax situation. Schedule F. There are higher rates for new and beginning farmers, historically underserved farmers. I see a 90% cost share rate there. So I encourage, we can talk for hours and days. I can provide some resources to Sean about technical standards and specifications and a better definition of cost share. Raised beds are not allowed, need to be in the soil profile themselves. Sean?
Sure. So, Brad, just to kind of circle back on that, you can raise beds in your tunnel, but it must be in the soil profile.
Yes.
So
yes.
we run vegetable plastic mulch layers through every tunnel that I'm involved with because I despise weeding. But again, that's part of the soil profile. You couldn't necessarily concrete pad the entire inside and then bring in soil on top. That's what you're saying.
Yes, very much so. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, we have one more very short segment before we take a break and get into our virtual farm tour. We're going to meet our brand new IPM state specialist, Dr. Clement Akotsa-Mensah. We call him Dr. Cam, and he's going to talk to us very quickly about IPM, because what you're going to find is that once you build your structure, there's always a little bit of a grace period, 2 or 3 years, and you feel like you have farming figured out, and then the insects find you, and a whole different host of issues begins to rear its head up. And so we wanted really to include this clip so that we're thinking holistically and systematically about integrative pest management.
My name is Clement Akoten Mensah. I am the state IPM specialist at Lincoln University, which means that my responsibility at Lincoln is to help our growers control their pests in high tunnels and in the field. So basically that is what I do at Lincoln. So this afternoon I'm here to talk to you about basic IPM in high tunnel. So the question is, what is IPM? IPM means Integrated Pest Management, which is defined as a pest management system whereby we use all available control measures in such a way that it will be sustainable, it will be economically viable, and then socially acceptable. And we do this to make sure that we bring pest population below economic injury level. Economic injury level means that for every pest, for every organism that we consider as pest, there is a level of population that the insect can be or the plant can tolerate that insect. But above a certain level of number of insects, the plant will not be able to really tolerate, and for that matter, they will damage your plant. So that is what IPM is all about, trying to put together all control measures in such a way that will bring insect population, and I'm talking about insect pest population, below economic injury level. In IPM, there are basic things that we have to do. First of all, number one, we have to make sure that we prevent the insect from getting into our plants. So number one is, in doing IPM, we have to do prevention. Number two, we have to do control. So these things are very important in doing IPM. So in prevention, you want to make sure that whatever plant or in your high tunnel, you prevent the insects from getting into your high tunnel. But if that is not successful, there are other things that you can do. And one of them is doing monitoring or scouting. Scouting and monitoring is very, very important. Scouting means that you have to come to your high tunnel and then do what we call scanning. Scanning means that you look at your plants and see if there are certain plants that are not doing well. Then you go to that plant to observe those plants critically. Most of the time you find that either the plant is diseased or it has some insect. So once you are able to detect the presence of the insects, you have to mark where the insects are found. So you can use these flagging tapes, and these flagging tapes will help you to identify the areas that you found your insect. And the reason you do that is for you to be able to go out there and then see whether the insects are spreading, so that if you have to spray, you can spray. Sometimes the whole high tunnel may not have the insect, so you might want to do spot spraying using things like small sprayers like this can help you to be spraying, spot spraying in your high tunnel instead of going to spray all your high tunnel. And that will reduce costs for you, because by doing that, you are saving, and at the same time also not exposing all the plants or the produce to harmful insecticides. So you have to get sprayers like this. It could be more, bigger than this, but these are used for spot spraying. So it is very important for you to have this one too. And then there is also weighing cap. So these are basic tools that you need for implementing IPM in your field. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so some of the insects are so little or so tiny that you not be able to use your naked eyes to see, and the magnifying glass will help you to detect if there are some insects. And some arthropods like mites, certain aphids, you can only use your magnifying glass to be able to detect them. So what you do is that you take your plant and then you observe under the magnifying glass if you have this tiny insect. So that is the use of the magnifying glass. So I'm going to talk about specific insect, and number one, aphids. Aphids are a major problem in high tunnels, and the reason is that in a high tunnel we are in December, and this high tunnel is almost 70 or more degrees. And aphids do well in environments like this. And we know that aphids are parthenogenic, genetic. So what they do is that they don't mate, and they can just produce by themselves. So a female aphid can produce by itself without a male, and they are able to produce a lot of young ones. So within a short period, you can have several aphids, and there are so many species of aphids that attack our crops in the high tunnel. But the good thing about aphid is that they are easy to be controlled. We can use spray, as I mentioned, depending on whether you are doing conventional or organic. There are products available to use in controlling aphids. You can also use parasitoids. There are a lot of parasitoids that you can buy and release them in your high tunnel to control aphids. So that is aphids control and management. So if you have any questions and concerns with your high tunnel, please, you can reach out to me or any of my colleagues, and my email is akotsen-mensahc@lincolnu.edu. And my phone number, my office phone number is 573-681-5634. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mensah, for allowing us to be able to play that and for putting that together for us. We genuinely appreciate it. All right, so what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to go into our last segment. And so this is Mr. Fu Yang, who we're going to have on camera with us just to sort of to visit and answer questions that you have. This is Yang Family Vegetables, and we've divided this video up to sort of try to show the transition that farms necessarily undergo when we're moving into a winter production out of warm season production. And so we have filmed this over 4 months: September, October, November, December. And we have a slide in between each of those 4 months, just simply to show that the necessary changes that take place, because it is a drastic difference, and it's been really neat to sort of work with Fu and to see. And so I'll go ahead and I'll start that for everybody. At the end of this, Fu will be with us, and we will open it up to question and answers. Again, for Mr. Fu Yang, as a private farmer who does successfully sell throughout the year, to Mr. Brad McCord, and to Dr. Akotsen Mensah for any insect questions. Okay, let me get us started.
Well, good evening again, everybody, and welcome to the first night of our virtual winter production conference. We're so thankful to have you. My name is Sean Bishop, and I'm the regional small farm specialist for the Southwest region of the state of Missouri, and I am here to introduce to you the first of 4 virtual farm tours that we're going to be going on together throughout essentially the month of February at this point. This is Mr. Fu Yang, the Yang Family Vegetable Farm that we're going to meet and talk to. This is sort of a unique operation. Fu's farm is essentially dedicated to the sort of the education of how-to for year-round winter production for our Hmong community in Southwest Missouri. So we're going to go through this with Mr. Fu and sort of what he has learned, looking at through the months from September until December, where his crops are and what he is doing. We're very excited to do this for you tonight, and please save any questions that you have until the end. Write them down so you remember them, and we'll see you at the end of the farm tour.
My name is Fu Yang of Yang Family Vegetables. We've been farming here in Southwest Missouri since 2012. Prior to that, we're in Massachusetts, farming up there, doing pretty much the same thing except without the high tunnels. We were farming up in Massachusetts. We came down here because my dad wanted to retire, and he wanted to come back and raise cows, lived a farm life like he used to do back in Laos. So we came down here. I thought that we had been done with farmers markets and gardening, but when my parents moved down here, they wanted to start that back up because they didn't have jobs or anything like that, and it was just something for them to do. So we started back up. We started doing farmers market. Well, my parents did back in 2010 when they first moved down here. I didn't actually start farmers market until 2012. They started with the Webb City Farmers Market, and they went to the Joplin Farmers Market. We grew lettuce, beans, cucumbers, and just regular produce and stuff like that. When we started, it was just the back field behind me here. We didn't have any high tunnels, and we didn't have any water. What we did for irrigation was we cut bottles of like soda or something like that, filled it up with water, dug a little hole besides the plant, and then filled it up with water and put it in the plant. That's how we did most of our irrigation back then. 2015, we had gotten this grant to put up the the Winter Education Center, and at the beginning of it, when it was all coming together, my dad, he was against the idea of putting up high tunnels because back in Massachusetts they had put some up, but they weren't really familiar with how everything worked in the high tunnel, how different it was. So he was against it at first, but going into this, our 4th or 5th year now, he loves it and he wants to put up more tunnels. So as of right now, we have 3 tunnels. 2 of them are 30 by 96. The last one is 30 by 144. So in this tunnel, in the springtime, we're growing strawberries in here. In the fall and winter, we are switching to kale and Swiss chard in here. They have just been planted and nothing has come up yet. This particular crop right here is ginger. What we do is when we dig them up in the fall, we'll cure them and then cut the pieces that we want to put back, save for seed, and plant them back in the springtime, usually after it stops, the frost stops. And then during the summer, we'll just keep healing them up a little bit. And when we harvest them, when we know it's time to harvest, you see these little tender nubs that come out there. I think they're flowers, but that's when we know that they've been ground in the ground long enough for us to dig them up. To prepare for market, we dig them up, we just wash them, and then we sell the whole plant because pretty much the whole plant is edible to us. We use the leaves in soups and stir fries, and but we don't actually eat it, but we put it in and then take it out after. It gives us that gingery flavor. And these little flower nubs, these are actually edible. We chop them up and put them in salsa and stir fries and stuff like that, and they give us a really nice ginger flavor. I have an associate's degree in specializing in horticulture, and the reason why that I decided to come back and do the farming is because I just love it. Love getting my hands dirty, the planting, seeing the crops grow, harvesting, and most importantly, seeing how happy people are when they get those crops. A lot of people, they just love it. When you're at the farmer's market and they come up and they're like, oh, you have this today. Oh, you have that today. This is new. Just putting smiles on people's faces and just providing them with their weekly food. The reason why we got into winter farming was, I guess, just to keep the income flowing throughout the winter time, and to see what we can grow in the winter time, because it is quite a little bit different from growing in the warm season versus the cool season. Differences, can't really grow peppers or eggplants or tomatoes. Well, I guess you can grow tomatoes. But more of a cool season crops like lettuce and spinach, kale and Swiss chard, mostly greens that we grow in the winter season and the fall season. Another is pests and problems and stuff. You don't get as much pest pressure as you do in the summertime. Most of those pests are dormant. The only thing that's really here is aphids, and those guys are everywhere all the time.
Alright, so this is our first tunnel, and right now it's full of cherry tomatoes. And what we're gonna do in the next couple of weeks is we're gonna be transitioning this over into Celanova plants, and we're gonna be planting them in these bags, taking the tomatoes out and putting in the bags, one plant per bag, and that will give us our mixed lettuce for the winter season. This is our seed starting structure. What we have in here right now is lettuce, these Celanova. We have some strawberries that we're supposed to plant, and onions in there right now. We typically do all of our lettuces, start the seeds here and then transplant them into our tunnels. It's just a little bit faster for us to do it that way than direct seeding. It gives us a little bit more accuracy on our plants, the number of plants that we put in there versus direct seeding, where sometimes they come up and sometimes they don't. While we are thinking about in August, September, and October wrapping up the summer crops, starting seeds around the last week of September to go into the tunnels. Usually we do this in preparation for our last weekday markets, which is usually ends in the first 2 weeks of October. So we're going to start cleaning out the tunnels after that and putting those started seeds, transplanting them into the tunnels for the fall and winter. That way we can have the crops ready for market in mid-November, before it's the daylight cuts out too much and the cold sets in, because they sort of stop growing after that. All right, the turnips on this side, they were direct seeded probably about 3 weeks ago. We should have, hopefully if everything goes right, the turnips, Napa cabbage, red and green loose leaf, kale, little Swiss chard. I think that's what we have planned for this year. Maybe some mustard green or something like that too. This is Napa cabbage, and it was transplanted about 3 weeks ago. And these were transplanted actually 2 days ago. For these red lettuce and these other, well actually not just this row, the other ones, that spinach over there was transplanted yesterday. The lettuce here was transplanted 2 days ago, this row and that row. The romaine was planted about 3 weeks ago, along with the spinach, half the row there. The smaller one was transplanted yesterday. We put this plastic mulch in because it's a little bit easier to do weed control within the beds itself, because it blocks out everything and kills all the weeds underneath. The beds we have here are 4 foot, using 4mm black plastic or black mulch. The black mulch helps retain and heat during the winter time, so that the roots are a little bit warmer. I think it helps the plants grow faster than just having them in the ground without the mulch. After we clean out the tunnel, these beds are all built by hand. We have a little furrower that we measure out the length of the width of the beds, and then we'll put some rope down there just to try to make the bed straight as possible, and then use that little furrower to dig a little trench down there, and then roll out the plastic by hand, and then bury them by hand too. which is a little bit time consuming, but all in all, I think it's worth it. Now, if you guys remember, this is the tunnel that we first shot in, which had ginger all along the sides over here. And as you can see, a couple weeks ago, we had a storm come through and it tore the plastic off. So afterwards, after the storm came through and tore the plastic off, most of the plastic just flew off. It took all the C channels and all the wiggle wire off with it. And I've been slowly trying to put it back together. At first I thought that all these, because these plants weren't covered, I thought that they were all gone, but as you can see, they're still here a little bit, and the kale is still here, and they don't look in too rough of a shape, so hopefully if we can get the cover back on soon enough, we'll be able to save this crop. The strawberries, they should be fine. The amount of daylight that we get during this time of the year is very important. It takes almost twice the length of time for lettuce and other plants to grow to maturity. And it is a pretty steep learning curve from growing in the summer to growing in the winter time because of that amount of daytime that we have. And just want people to realize that it takes a little bit longer for the plants to grow to come to harvest. The outer rows of this tunnel were transplanted a couple days ago. And in this particular time frame, we're just waiting for our plants to grow, because it's a little bit cooler out, the daytime's shorter, so it takes a longer amount of time for the plants to be ready to harvest. I like this particular bag system. I think the last time we shot, we had tomatoes all in here, and we took the tomatoes out, and these bags are perfect for head lettuce and Cella Nova lettuce, because we like to plant them, you know, 1 or 2 heads together here, and they're just the perfect size. They don't take up too much space for each head. And when we harvest individual leaves rather than cutting the whole head off and letting it regrow. That way we can plant less plants and have the same amount of product for market. All right, as you guys can all see, we finally got the plastic back on, and when we lost the plastic, we had planted in between the rows here Swiss chard and kale, which when the plastic blew off, the plants were so small that they didn't make it through the cold. So what you see here now is the remaining Swiss chard that survived the cold. And so we wanted to utilize this tunnel because strawberries, they take a long time. Generally, you know, it's a spring crop. So in order to utilize this tunnel, we planted in between the rows so that we can harvest in here during the winter. Now it's looking more towards like spring because of all the setbacks that we had, but yeah, we planted some traditional Asian greens in here, and then we replanted back the kale that was in here before the plastic got torn out. So I've been a farmer doing farmers markets for maybe 15 to maybe 20 years now, and what I have noticed that traditionally farmers markets usually run the spring throughout the fall, and then the farmers, if they're doing this full-time, they would have to get a part-time job to sustain them through the winter until they can get back into gardening or farming. What I've noticed that with the tunnels, you can do this year-round, especially in these parts, because we have farmers markets that are open year-round, and therefore you don't have to go out there and find a part-time job to sustain yourself while you're in that transition from winter back to spring again.
All right, everybody. Thank you very much for allowing us to be able to play that for you. I know that it is quite some time to sit and watch a video, but I think it was worth it. And we want to welcome Mr. Fu Yang here with us tonight. Fu, thank you so much for allowing us to barge into your farm for
Oh,
4
no, thank
months.
you guys.
We really do appreciate you. It's a beautiful operation. So just to sort of recap to people, you have 3 high tunnels, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
30 by 96 for 2 of them. And then how long is the big one?
The big one is 144.
And that's the one you lost the plastic on.
Yes.
Again, trying to bring out that the high tunnel is not a silver bullet. It's just simply a tool, right?
Yes.
They have their own issues.
Yes.
We have to talk about the bag system real quick for people to sort of bring
Sure.
them up to speed. Why are those bags in there? Why aren't you growing in the soil profile?
Well, when we first started with the tunnels, we found out that we had southern blight in there. So the bags were sort of to combat that instead of removing all the soil and putting new soil in there.
Sure. Yeah, it was almost devastating. We sent off a sample because we kept having issues in that tunnel, and you had called, and we sent that off to a state pathologist lab, and they sent us back, we can't believe how much actual soil southern blight is in that soil profile.
Yeah.
And so that's just what was decided. And you do like the bag system.
Oh, I love the bag system.
Yeah, that's great. Now, just for everybody listening, this is exactly what you cannot do with an NRCS tunnel. That would not be allowed. Fu's tunnels are not NRCS tunnels, but that's what we're talking about, having to be in the soil profile. Very interestingly, just maybe to circle back around, your dad was opposed to the idea of high tunnels, sort of at first, and now he very much is excited about what they are, what they've done for you all.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us about that. Why do you think that is?
Well, my parents are very traditional. They learned gardening through generations of doing it, and something like a high tunnel was a totally different thing for them. They never really toyed with the idea before, because the growing season is usually from spring to fall, and that's it.
Sure.
But with these high tunnels, we can go into the winter season.
Sure.
And when we were in Massachusetts, they did have a tunnel put in, but they didn't really know how to use it, because during the daytime, there's a big temperature fluctuation. And when it came to nighttime, because it was winter, temperature dropped back down to like 20s and teens, and all the crops was gone because there was no heat in there.
Sure.
So he came down with that mentality, and he's like, it's not going to work because everything's just going to die. But what we found out was totally different.
That's wonderful. And sort of, I love what you said there at the very last, sort of at the outro of the video, the idea that you do this so that you don't have to take a side job.
Yes.
You do this so that you can have year-round income on the farm. And I think that that's so very important, because there's almost this romantic view of what farming is.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is, in some cases, it's much different than that. This is a business, and we have to make money.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of in that, and maybe my last thing for you, and then we'll open it up to our wonderful audience for questions. How many different farmers markets do you sell at?
We did 3 farmers markets.
3 of them.
Yep.
And they are?
Webb City Farmers Market of the Ozarks, and Ozark Farmers Market.
Very good. Are they all year round?
Webb City is, and Farmers Market of the Ozark is.
Very good. Very good. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, everybody, what we're going to do is, inside the chat, before we start asking our questions, we're going to drop in a survey, and this is extremely important. We need this information for you so that if you do like this, we can continue to offer content like this for you in the future. Robert is going to do that now. please take just a couple of minutes throughout this question and answer session here at the very end of our evening. Please fill this out for us. It's extremely important. Let us know what you liked, what you did not, and this will affect what we do moving forward, how we sort of approach these things moving forward. Okay. And with that, Robert, if you want to go ahead and drop it in. Take a second. That you should just be able to click that. That's a live link to a survey, and fill that out for us. And with that, let's open it up for questions for our remaining time. If you have a question, please type it in the chat. And we'll try very much to get to all of them that we can by our 8 o'clock end time.
So Sean, there was a question about if you had to be a commercial grower to get to high tunnel. David Middleton answered it for us. If folks hadn't seen the answer, is that you do not need to be a commercial grower to have a high tunnel. You can use it for your own personal use. And for giving away vegetables, there may be stipulations with whatever kind of cost share program that you would be working under. So you might want to check with that first regarding tunnel size and those types of things.
Sure.
Okay. Sure. But a lot of folks use this for their own personal use. Okay. Lots of thanks for DA. Talk about your high tunnel ginger production and season extension. Are you saving seed?
For the ginger,
Yes.
at the moment we are.
Too much feedback.
At the moment we are saving seeds. It cuts down on a lot of costs for us.
Fu, talk about as far as ginger production goes. When do you start to actually sprout them?
Right around this time.
Right around this time.
Yep.
So you'll take them, and when will you actually go into the tunnel with that ginger, that baby ginger? Sprouts.
Usually around April.
Around April, put it
Yep.
in there, and you grow them until
Until September.
right. So it's a long
Yes,
season.
it is a very long
Right.
season. Yes.
It takes up a lot of time. Sincerely, it
Mhm.
doesn't, and that's something that we need to think about for high tunnel production. Is this is precious real estate. Every square foot in here should be making me X amount of dollars in my profit margin so that I can have a comfortable living. Ginger is a high value crop, but it takes a lot of time. How are you selling it? By pound, by ounce, just as far as just a clump? How do you actually sell it?
We sell it whole plants.
You sell whole plant.
Yeah, we sell whole plants.
And what do you get per whole plant?
I think the going rate is $15 a pound.
Sure.
But we cut them, if they're real big clumps, we'll cut them in half or something like that and sell them for $6 or $7 a clump
There you go.
with the leaves on them.
Okay, very good, very good. It's something to think about. We did some ginger research at the Southwest Research Center in that high tunnel that you've seen the end wall blowout on. And the reason why we found it to be attractive is simply because what we see with people with high tunnels is we grow tomatoes, and then we have a disease buildup in that soil profile. So how do you break a disease cycle? You plant something that's not related botanically to the previous crop. Ginger would be one way to do that and still have a very high value crop inside of your tunnel. Okay.
So we have two related questions to what you just said. The first one is, are there other ways to eliminate southern blight in the high tunnel besides growing in soil bags? You just gave one. Okay. And the second question is do you pre-sprout your ginger rhizomes?
Go ahead with pre-sprouting.
A lot of farmers, they do pre-sprout. It just gives it a little bit more boost in that springtime because it's such a long season.
Sure.
You want to get growing as soon as possible when it hits the dirt. We do some and we don't. And we found out that the ones that we do pre-sprout in January, they'll come up a lot faster and they'll grow a lot faster than the ones that we place directly in the ground.
Sure. So almost yes for pre-sprouting ginger, simply because it'll help shorten that season up and give you quality product before you run into a frost or a hard freeze in the fall. The second, we had a question about controlling southern blight. This is one of the sad places where I've spoken to several state specialists that are pathologists, and we really don't have any decent controls for that I am aware of that would be economically viable for specialty crop production. So the traditional way had just been remove the soil profile literally from the house, from the tunnel, and bringing brand new soil profile. And that wouldn't necessarily get rid of everything, but it would allow you several more growing years before it would be built back up in the soil. The best control methods that we have found have been, if you have people out to your farm, have protocols in place where they wash or sanitize the bottom of their boots, right? If you go to somebody else's farm on a farm visit, so we'll be doing farm visits this spring on the Tomato Production School, right? We're going to have things in place for that biosecurity to make sure that we don't drag things onto people's farms and then you take things from their farms home. And so that's really sort of the best advice that we can offer at this particular point. Rotation, cover cropping, adding to that soil health, adding to those organisms that sort of feed your plants, right? And then having a protocol in place if you do have people come out to your farm from their growing areas, from their farms. Any other questions, Robert?
Can solarization reduce disease incidence?
So there has been a lot of work, specifically what I have read in the literature is from Florida. I'm not necessarily convinced, especially if we're talking about southern blight, that solarization can reduce incidence simply because we don't have that perfectly direct contact with sun like we see in regions that are further south at that just right angle to heat it up underneath the plastic. I do know that Jason Hertz is doing some work with solarization, and we can talk about that next week. We'll be sure to put a pin in that because he's got some interesting things that he's doing looking at weed control and solarization, but not necessarily disease control and solarization.
Okay, so we've got a clarification in the chat regarding raised beds in high tunnels.
Okay.
10-inch wood-sided raised beds directly on the soil are allowed in NRCS funded tunnels. So there's the answer.
Right
there. Okay.
Yeah.
And Eileen pointed out, she's our sponsor, of course, Webb City Farmers Market.
We love you,
Eileen. Very
Eileen.
experienced in marketing things, and she has pointed out that selling the whole ginger plant is eye-catching and tells the customer that this ginger is very different from that found dried in the grocery store.
Sure.
Which is also very good. Okay, so a technical question now. How do you replenish organic matter or add other amendments in your tunnels if there is no break between crops?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So the question was, and I'm so sorry, I don't know if you can hear the question. We have Robert sort of in the background helping us with questions. The question was, how in the world do you have a healthy soil profile if all you do is grow year round, right? Which is fair. So there are a number of ways. The easiest way would be you having multiple tunnels, and then you have a sabbatical for one of those tunnels, whereby you cover crop and you add compost, you take it out of production, you take the plastic off the top of it, and you let rainfall, you let freeze and thaw happen naturally, and then you come rotate back into that tunnel. For that to be perfect, you would need 4 tunnels. Really, for a lot of us, that's not necessarily an option. And so there are tips and tricks for tunnels, such as things like adding compost in between your plant cycles, right? So there are some wonderful composting facilities throughout the state of Missouri that have quality compost. And as you turn a bed over, you add that compost, you add those nutrients back. Also, cutting down your tillage, right? Nobody likes to be riding a tractor or behind a beautiful BCS more than I do. But tillage destroys soil structure and ultimately invites a lot of issues into that really valuable real estate under plastic on your farm. And so if we can get to a point where, and you'll see this on Doug and Karen's, it's just absolutely wonderful how they do their weed control, where your beds are added to and you're on top of that weeding, and all you're having to do is just sort of sift through those top layers to control those weeds. It's a wonderful system. For myself, how I amend in mine is I soil block. Now, there are a lot of issues with soil blocking. I'm not necessarily recommend that everybody get into it, but the way that we do ours, we amend it something like 9 tons to an acre when we're going in just those little beds, because we're putting in 2-inch squares on everything and running that down the tunnel. And that's given us a lot of amendments. I use essentially the old Elliott Coleman recipe. And so that puts nutrients back into the soil. On top of that, there has to be rotation. Again, it doesn't matter, sort of what you're doing. If all you're doing is tomatoes, like we've spoken about, you're going to have disease issues built up eventually, and then you're going to be out of the game, regardless of what your micronutrient values are. And I hope that was enough said to make Susan Jaster happy with me.
Okay, 2 other questions. One, we should probably do just a little bit later. It's about, for food, about why would you speculate that the larger high tunnel lost its plastic when the smaller one did not?
Ooh.
But before we get into that question, there's a follow-up on the compost, Sean. Would you be able to give us, and it just went down there. Would you be able to give us an indication of the sources of compost? What kind of compost would be good?
Sure.
Some people here mention things like worm castings and
Sure.
soil blocking and those types of things. But is there a bad compost for high tunnels?
So is there a bad compost, and what is a good quality compost? What I would tell you to do, and we have to be careful with this because we're recording and this is a sponsored extension event. We can't necessarily mention one company over another. So what I would encourage those of you that are on the call, Karen, Scott, Jason, if Liz or if Miranda's on there, I know Miranda is, would you type in some good companies where you get your compost? Because these individuals, these compost companies actually do run their numbers to see what nutrients and what values are in their compost. And they're making it specifically for vegetable production, right? Or fruit production, or if you would talk to them and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is the optimal nutrient levels, which Extension can give you. We can give you that information. Can you make me compost mixed up like this? And so that's what I would encourage to do, just sort of a networking of our farmers in the chat. Who's good companies, who's trusted sources that you've used on your personal farms. And I know that there are several. And I hope that doesn't feel like that we're skating around that question, but that's, I think, the best way we can handle that without anybody getting slapped on the hand.
There are several popping up.
Great. Food, do you want to talk about the plastic?
Yeah, sure. So the plastic, the first 2 tunnels, the smaller ones, we had the plastic replaced prior to the third one breaking down. So the 2 plastics were newer. The first 2 tunnels also have 2 layers of plastic on, which makes it with the air going through the middle.
Sure.
The air pockets, it makes it a lot stronger, a lot tighter, versus that third tunnel where it's so big. The plastic itself weighs over 200 pounds, and to pull that plastic tight is really hard.
Yeah, right.
So when the wind blows, it kind of sort of flaps, and as it flaps, it loosens up, and it loosens up all the wiggle wire in the seed channels.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you get a big gust of wind like that, because like you said earlier, it just takes off. Mm-hmm. And it just flew.
It's a very good kite, yeah. That's really interesting. And that's what we found as well, is that if you have a double layer polytunnel, which it just simply means that you have 2 pieces of plastic on top of each other slid over the ribs of the tunnel. And there's a little squirrel cage blower motor that we put on those structures. It's a little 60 cubic feet per minute fan. It costs nothing, and they run for quite some time. They inflate those two pieces of plastic, and you're doing that primarily for R value, to sort of slow that temperature drop. Instead of a big drop when the sun goes down, there's a nice gradual decline, and that lets everybody get used to the cooler temperatures. We've also found that in hailstorms, in snow load, and in windstorms, that those double layer tunnels are actually more resilient to those external forces, which is pretty neat. I didn't know that kind of going in, and actually thought the opposite.
Okay, so there was one question, and I don't know if it's been answered thoroughly.
Okay.
But folks are asking, who can they call upon to help set up a high tunnel
Sure.
if they can't do it themselves?
Sure. So who builds high tunnels? All right. So there are a number of manufacturers around the Midwest part of the United States for high tunnel production, right? For producing high tunnel manufactured kit that is necessary for you if you've got an NRCS grant, right? You can't just run out to your local hardware store and put the pieces and parts together yourself. You have to buy a manufactured kit. So traditionally, those individuals, the manufacturers of high tunnels, have a contact list of trusted, hopefully bonded construction companies. The catch is NRCS only reimburses you so much per square foot, right? So whether that costs you twice that to get it built, they're not worried about. It's just so much that they're going to give you. And when you sign the contract with them, it'll tell you exactly what you're receiving, regardless of what you put into it. That's how much money you're going to get from that contract. The last time that we checked the cost of the tunnel, which I've got two 30 by 72s, I bought my last one this past year, and it cost $8,200. The last time that I checked with construction companies, they were charging the same that the unit cost to put them up. Okay. So you just went to $16,400. So think about that. Before coronavirus, what we would do at Lincoln with our partnership with Web City, with the wonderful people with MU, is we would host 2 barn raising workshops a year, one in the spring and one in the fall, where we would pick 2 individuals that had received an NRCS grant. It's an application based, we make the decision. And we would gather a community of first-time contract individuals with NRCS together on these farms, these 2 farms we would choose, and we would build a high tunnel. We would teach you how to do it. And the hope was that the farming community would come together and continue to support each other. Since COVID, we have not done that. But since COVID, there has also been several YouTube videos of people start to finish building high tunnels. So it gives you that idea of how to do it. And again, we're always available to answer questions via email. If you have sort of the nitty gritty stuff and how to get started, we're here for you. We'll be more than happy to help you with that. But until sort of everything goes back to some semblance of normalcy, we're very cautious on those person-to-person workshops.
Okay, a question, a little more clarification on the plastic coming off is that the double layer being tighter is basically a reason that it didn't blow away.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay,
Yeah.
so that's good. Okay, so how often typically does the plastic have to be replaced? And what about contractors that will replace plastic covers?
Sure. The question was how often do you have to replace 6 mil greenhouse plastic? It depends, which is the classic extension answer when we're trying to get out of something, but that is genuinely the answer. Manufacturers say 3 to 5 years, depending on the weave and type of fiber that you're buying. But that's traditionally what we shoot for. Now, that does not mean that it's going to be ripped and tattered. But what it does mean is as your plastic goes along on timeline, it becomes more opaque and less of the full spectrum of light gets into your plants. And that affects the growth of your plants and it affects their nutrient value. And so if you are growing greens underneath plastic that's 6, 7 years old, they literally will have less nutrients in them than somebody down the road who put up a brand new tunnel and has a first year cover of plastic. So it's not necessarily that you need to replace the plastic because it's ripped or it looks terrible. It's because as it goes along, less light spectrum can get through that tunnel to your plants. The same list of construction experts would be who I would recommend to contact to replace plastic. And plastic is a difficult thing. It cannot be windy when you're dealing with a 50 by 100 foot sheet of plastic. That's not an option. You will go, it's a really fun ride, until you come back down, because that's what'll happen. And we've seen it before. We've had tractors literally flipped over. We tried to tie it off one day when the wind came up on a farm and it took the tractor off. So that's the only caveat is you're going to have to work with a construction company in your local area. And it's got to be a non-windy day. Traditionally, when the sun is coming up or when the sun is setting, we found winds to be, unless there's a front moving in, that's the most calm time of the day.
Okay, so we are just after 8 o'clock.
Okay.
And so we have 3 questions remaining in the chat.
Okay.
First one is the plastic recyclable?
Last 3 questions. Is the plastic recyclable? If you can keep the plastic clean and you happen to have a recycling facility near you, then I would say that you could move the plastic to the recycling facility, again, calling ahead of time. But they do not like dirty plastic. We have a huge issue with the plastic mulch that Fu has shown you guys in the ground. Nobody will accept that. Nobody will take that. And so we're looking at sort of the biodegradable that's out now in the market that's actually good. When they first came out, they weren't, but now they are. Okay, second question.
Okay, so there's 2 questions remaining, both about crops, and both for Fu.
Fantastic.
And so the one is, are you expecting strawberries this spring or summer from your tunnel plantings?
Yes, I am. Generally, we start picking around March, about halfway into March, and then our season will go all the way till middle of June. Mm-hmm. That's what we're expecting this year.
Okay, and the final question is about cherry tomatoes.
Oh my goodness.
Are you expecting to grow cherry tomatoes again?
Yes, we are. Our markets are very good for cherry tomatoes. We grow the full tunnel, that first full tunnel with cherry tomatoes, and then we have the same amount in the field. Mm-hmm. So we grow twice as much cherry tomatoes. And like I said, we do have a very good market for them here. And that's one of the reasons why. And in the summertime, no matter how warm it is, they'll still produce versus the big tomatoes where they kind of weigh down a little bit until it gets cooler. Right. Those guys will just keep going.
Yeah, very prolific for sure.
Yeah.
And food, just to clarify, your strawberries are Chandler?
Yes.
So they're a June bearing.
Yep, they're June bearing.
Yeah. How long do you keep the individual mother plants in? How many seasons?
This is our first year keeping them 2 seasons.
Okay. All right.
Usually we take them out right during the first week of June. We'll take them out.
Sure.
But this year, like I said, we had that long season, so we never took them out. And then it was too late in the season to put anything back in there, so we just left them.
Gotcha. Very good. Very good. Okay. Well, with that, I want to thank Fu so much for allowing us to barge into his life.
No problem. Thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for letting us onto your beautiful farm this evening. And a very special thanks to Webb City for allowing us to be able to host this, to our sponsor, Missouri Department of Agriculture. Thank you, Brad McCord from NRCS, and Dr. Clementa Coatson for your wonderful presentation.